My great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, who happens to be probably my favorite executive vice president at Atrium, and a real kindred spirit and innovation, Dr. Rasu Shrestha. Dr. Shrestha comes through to us after doing his residency program and an informatics fellowship in London. I know we have some folks here from the UK who had a chance to compare notes with him on that. 25 years of experience at UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which, as you all know, is one of the great systems in the U.S. And at UPMC, Dr. Shrestha was a chief information officer and also the executive vice president for all of the UPMC enterprises, which is a very large role. He's got tremendous number of honors and board positions, which I could go on and on for, and some of it's in your program there. You can review that on your own. But he's been the board and chair of the Innovation Committee for the Healthcare Information and Management Services System, and also the Executive of the Year for Healthcare Dive, a top healthcare innovation and top 20 IT leader by Information Weekly. He's in his fourth year with us at Atrium now. And one of the things that has been tremendously important to me personally and to you all, whether you know it or not, is that he's really opened the eyes of our CEO and our board to the concept of innovation. And one of the most important things happening in the Southeast, and you all represent the Southeast here with this meeting, is going to be a program called ERCAD that's being developed in Charlotte. And he's here to tell you about that today. So I won't steal any of his thunder, but really an important project for our whole region. So without further ado, let me welcome to the podium Dr. Rasu Shrestha.
Can you all hear me all right? Excellent, wonderful. All right. So really excited to be here. I noticed in the program that there was a hashtag, so I put that on the title slide as well. If you want to connect with me on Twitter and use the hashtag, feel free to do that as well. Thank you, T, for the warm introduction there, and really appreciate the leadership here in having me here present to you the Pearl, right? This is our innovation district. And I'll talk to you about some of the specifics of what the Pearl is going to bring, some of the pearls of wisdom, if I can start with the puns, right? The pearls of wisdom in terms of how it's going to really spur not just the future of medical education and research and translational science and industry collaboration, but also economic development and pipelines of jobs. So there's a lot that's on the shoulders of the Pearls. I'll talk to you about a number of those elements as we get further into the program here. But I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the journey that we have been together on in the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, right, of having lived through the pandemic. And I think that's a really important element to take into account, especially from a strategy perspective, as I, a fellow physician, with all of you, think about what's the future of healthcare. Right, in the decades that we've been trying to solve for some of the biggest challenges in healthcare, we've been struggling. Right, healthcare today is a $3.8 trillion industry, and as much as we're really innovative here in the United States, we still have a lot of struggles in terms of how we need to really move forward with some of the perhaps biggest challenges, whether it's around societal impact, whether it's around some of the economics, or whether it's also in terms of some of how we truly innovate. I love this quote here, and it says, on the other side of a storm is the strength that comes from having navigated through it. So the good news is if you're all here, you've all navigated through it. So you all have that strength that is depicted in this quote that I've captured in this slide. So how do you tap into that strength? How do you make sure that you're able to channel it in the right direction? And how do we then collectively move on forward through what I believe needs to be more of an ecosystem approach? It is not about it is more about us and we. So a little bit about Atrium Health, for those of you who don't know Atrium Health as much. This is our mission statement. So when I was in Pittsburgh at UPMC, leading innovation and leading some of the strategies that really culminated in all the innovations and the growth that UPMC enjoyed in the many years that I was there, including on the health plan side and on the investment side, on the entrepreneurship side. Gene Woods came calling. Gene's the CEO president of Atrium Health. And what really tugged at my heartstrings was this, the mission statement, right? It is about improving health, elevating hope, and advancing healing for all. And it's that last part of the mission statement that really is a call to action in so many different ways. And again, as I reflect back on the storm that we've all lived through, it is that last part of the mission statement that also really rose to the challenge in terms of, how do we as a health system truly navigate through those storms and bring out the best of who we are and who we can be in service of the communities that we're a part of across the Southeast. This is the numbers slide. So a bunch of numbers about Atrium Health. We serve a combined population of about 7 million patients, and that is continuing to grow on a daily basis. About 70,000 teammates across the 4 or 5 states in the Southeast, and about $12.5 billion in annual revenue. What's really interesting too is we're at an interesting point in part of our strategy at Atrium Health. So we just went live with Impact 2025 last year, and this is our 4 or 5 year corporate strategy. And part of that strategy is around growth, scale, and influence. And it's not growth in just the traditional elements of how health systems grow. It is also about scaling, and it is about influence as well. And one of the things that's happening right now, and this is public knowledge, is the announcement that Atrium Health will be coming together with Advocate Aurora Health System. So really excited about that for any of you that might be from the Midwest. This large health system based out of the Southeast coming together with this equally large health system that's based out of the Midwest. And the numbers that you see here essentially will be doubled as a result of that. So that is a pretty massive ambition that we're bringing to the table. And what's really interesting in all of that, and goes back to, again, Charlotte, which is the headquarters for Atrium Health, is the fact that as we think about this growth, scale, and influence, the opportunity there that we're also shooting for is one where we're really gravitating towards some of those struggles that we have in our local communities and how we solve for those struggles and for the industry as a whole in healthcare in a pretty massive way through this gravitational pull of the combined entity that we will be. The combined entity, and we've announced this as well, will be headquartered in Charlotte. Right, so that's the other big aha moment as I talk about the innovation district that we're going to be building in Charlotte is, how do we make sure that we're able to really capitalize on that momentum that we're going to be building in a very short order here. So I talked about the storm, and I won't belabor this, but it was tough. It was tough for all of us. And I put this slide here, and this is an infographic that my team made that shows all of the amazing things that we did as a health system, again, in service of the communities that we're a part of. And all of you as physicians and leaders were a part of this in your respective communities here across the Southeast. And it's really amazing, right? Part of what we saw through the pandemic was the power of partnerships, right? Public-private partnerships, unlikely partnerships that really came together to really showcase the best of who we can together be in service of our patients and our communities, and even our underserved populations that we really need to take care of as well. So I remember, pulling together with teams the partnerships with the likes of Honeywell. They're headquartered in the Charlotte area. Bank of America, also headquartered there. We had these mass vaccination campaigns. And you remember those mass vaccination campaigns, right? And in Charlotte, it was 20, 30,000 vaccinations over a weekend, a shot in the arm every 4 seconds, the logistics behind it, the way in which we're able to coordinate all of that. It really came together as a result of those unlikely partnerships. And we saw the power of those partnerships. So just hold on to that thought for a little bit, because that really is then encapsulated in the specifics of how the innovation district is coming together. So you're all leaders, whether you know it or not. You're all leaders. And as we lead forward, not just in clinical care and research and academics, but also in the service component that I've emphasized now a couple of times across our industry, I think it's really important for us to understand that leadership is not about certainty. If you think that leadership is about certainty, I want my leader to be really certain and provide to me certainty, then that's a fallacy. I do believe that leadership, however, is about clarity. And I think that's really important. So as we've lived through the pandemic, as we now use that as a pivot point for the innovations that are coming, the transformations that are coming, for how we need to rethink what healthcare is all about and how we need to rethink what partnerships can do for us collectively. Here are a couple of thoughts that I have in terms of just the pivot points, the clarity elements of what it looks like perhaps on this side of the pandemic. We are one global community. And I'll talk about ERCAD, that's based out of Strasbourg, France, that has footprints in various parts of the globe, including in Shanghai and China and South America and other parts of the world. And there isn't an ERCAT in North America yet, but we're going to solve for that, so that's the teaser. But the pandemic, right, what started in Wuhan, China, has affected every one of us in every nook and corner of not just the country, but the world. The walls between medicine and public health have really come down. And you've seen this, how, traditionally you had a health system, and that's where medicine was practiced, right? And then public health and the county and all of that, they were charged with more of, managing maybe certain types of vaccinations, but the sewer system and all of that, right? So it was quite different. And now you've seen that those walls have really come down in the most powerful ways. We're all in science and research and academia, and we've seen the walls between health sciences and life sciences come down as well. So you've seen the power of working together with drug companies and the likes of Pfizer and others, the clinical trials, the science that got expedited in record time through the pandemic. Fee-for-service has failed the test of the pandemic, and I think that's a really important notion to comprehend as well. We saw how, as health systems were making tremendous losses through the pandemic, payers were making tremendous profits through the pandemic. And I'm not pointing a finger at the payers. What I am doing, however, is pointing at the reality that fee-for-service has really failed the test of the pandemic. So how do we focus in on value? How do we focus in on experience? And we'll talk a little bit about experiential learning and the future of experiential learning. And then last but not least, cloud, virtual AI, these technologies, these buzzwords that you oftentimes hear about and read about, these are not just buzzwords or aspirational elements anymore. These are fundamental must-haves in the strategies of how we now need to expeditiously build the future of healthcare today. So with all of that, what's one to do, right? How do we make sure that we're able to encapsulate the clarity that we're able to capture through the pandemic and really move on forward in a very intentional way? So Dr. Wayne Meredith is the chair of the Department of Surgery and is actually based out of Wake, not too far from here, Winston-Salem. And in one of the board meetings, as we were talking about the innovation district, as we were talking about some of the things that we're doing around innovation, he said, we're building something that has never existed on the face of this earth. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement to have come from Dr. Wayne Meredith. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this. I mentioned Impact 2025. This is our 4 or 5 year strategic plan, and we just launched this last year. And you're familiar now with the mission statement that's right at the top of that chart. And at the bottom is our new vision statement, and this is to be the national leader in health, learning, and community. And you see a lot of emphasis on that trifecta. And you'll see as I talk about the innovation district and ERCAD, how those elements around health, learning, and community are really coming together in this innovation district concept. So the good news in building out an innovation district is that this is not our first ride in the rodeo, right? So just about 20 minutes, half an hour from here is actually Innovation Quarter. So as part of Atrium Health coming together with Wake Forest Baptist Health, now Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist, Innovation Quarter is part of the family as well. So really excited about this. And there's this concept of the knowledge economy that I'll get to as well. You see here a quote from the Global Institute of Innovation Districts, where they define innovation districts. These are dense hubs of economic activity where innovation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and placemaking intersect. It's a really interesting choice of words there. And these are elements that we as physicians are really interested in, but we don't really have too much time to dabble in, right? We're innovative. That's what we do on a day in, day out basis, whether it's in treating a patient or in the OR or in any research work that we do. We have an entrepreneurial zeal and enthusiasm, and we are creative in large parts. But what does placemaking do? How do we make sure that we're able to factor in what I call intentional collisions that could be the culmination of an innovation district? And how do we make sure that we're able to do this in a very intentional way such that we can bring the best of who we are and have the right elements of those intentional collisions actually be a catalyst in truly innovating and transforming for the future of healthcare? So that's what we've been doing at the Innovation Quarter now. Upwards of about 90 companies based out of IQ here in Winston-Salem. And really a thriving ecosystem. And we're going to be investing more in IQ. There's the announcement of IQ2 that will be coming out soon. So really excited about that. But now a little bit about Charlotte, right? So Charlotte, when I moved there about 4 years ago from Pittsburgh, just was very surprising in so many ways, right? It's not Pittsburgh, right? There aren't more than 440 whatever bridges that Pittsburgh has, the three rivers. And I love Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's really beautiful. But Charlotte has a charm to it. The fact that it is one of the largest financial hubs in the country, second only to New York City. So fintech, and part of the things that we're pushing for is the intersection between fintech and health tech. Right? So really interesting in how innovation can be fostered as a result of that. The Charlotte Douglas International Airport is 15 minutes away from uptown Charlotte. So really excited about how do we capitalize in on this hub of a world-class airport that we have right in our backyards there. The favorable business climate. The rate with which Charlotte is growing is quite fascinating right now. It's one of the fastest growing cities in North America, growing faster than San Francisco. And that's quite remarkable as well. So how do we capitalize in on all of these different elements as we think about building out an innovation district? But before we talk about the future, I wanted to talk a little bit about the past as well. And I think that's really important. And as a strategist, I always try to talk about the past, the present, and the future. Right? As we think about the future and build out the future, it's important for us to pay homage to our past. And as I reflect on this through the storm that we've lived through, as we talked about in the pandemic, this past becomes even more abjectly important in how we then work on the things that we're going to be building together in the present for everything that we will see birthed in the future. So we looked at the history as an inspiration for even the name for the Innovation District. So there's the Pearl Street Park. This is Charlotte's first African-American park. And Brooklyn was really the epicenter of Charlotte's African-American population, the largest concentration of African-Americans across the Carolinas. And the sad part about all of this is that it actually got displaced. And I'll talk a little bit about this. As Charlotte continued to grow, that got displaced. And it's amazing that Charlotte is the city that it is today, but I think it's important to pay homage to that past. So we're going to be coming back to that. The name Pearl, right, it also symbolizes growth through disruption, right? That itty-bitty piece of sand that gets in that clam, in that oyster, and then through disruption, through various dynamics and forces that are coming at it, essentially comes out as a gem at the other end. And I think that's very symbolic of the things that we could collectively be doing in this innovation district as well. So combining the elements of IQ, the Innovation Quarter, and the Pearl, and you see the intentional connection there through the logo, is essentially the intent behind the Innovation District. So welcome to the Pearl, right? So this is where Charlotte grows next. But what I'm here to share with you is this is not just about Charlotte. This really is about growth and opportunities across the Southeast and beyond. So I'll get into that in just a little bit. But part of what we're doing is connecting the Innovation Quarter and the Pearl through this concept of the corridor. So how do we accelerate the resources that are present in any of the geographies? So we see in Winston-Salem, not just the presence of IQ, but a lot of amazing things happening in life sciences and academics and research. And in Charlotte, lots of amazing things happening through clinical advancements, the depth and breadth of the activities across Atrium Health, across the Southeast, really. And then those elements of what I described earlier as some of the bright spots in Charlotte. So connecting it up through this corridor is a big goal of ours as well. So quick video to introduce to you the Pearl. So you saw there in the video that this is also the home for our new medical school, the second campus of the Wake Forest University School of Medicine, and Charlotte's first four-year medical schools. If you can, for those of you not from Charlotte, if you can imagine Charlotte, one of the larger metropolitan cities in the country, doesn't have a four-year medical school. So we said we're going to solve for that. And so really excited about how we're going to have the second campus of the Wake Forest School of Medicine and Charlotte's first four-year medical school be birthed right out of the Pearl itself. So Pearl, right? So these are some of the planning principles. We want to maximize access and connectivity. We want to make sure that we're incorporating a mix of research and innovation and education. And I'll come back to that education piece in just a little bit. But mixed income housing, retail, hospitality, there'll be a hotel right in the middle of the Pearl. There'll be different types of retail facilities. But then there's also this placemaking component, right? Making sure that we're able to have these intentional collisions that I was talking about earlier. So for those of you who don't know where the site is, this was one of the biggest kept secrets in the region here for a while before we outed this sometime ago. But it is quite amazing. And I don't know if you can see my, yep, you can see the laser there. So that's Uptown Charlotte. And this is Carolina's Medical Center, our big flagship hospital. And the Pearl is located right in the middle of the two. And it's essentially within 5 minutes walking distance from Uptown Charlotte. And the livability index is something that we've been really paying attention to as well, making sure that we're able to have a thriving ecosystem of where clinicians will be able to, go back and forth, have lunch, go for a lecture, but interact also with, labs and industry partners and others as needed. So the opportunities will be quite tremendous, and I'll double click on that in just a little bit. Here's the fascinating number, 30 acres. Right, so the secret was through the pandemic, we had 5 shell companies acquire adjacent land, none of them called Atrium Health, those shell companies, right? And we were able to amass upwards of 30 acres of land in what is a really critical part of the Charlotte neighborhood. And I think that in large parts was not just widgetry, it was also a blessing in disguise because we're able to now really focus in on building the future of this innovation district in a very critical spot in Charlotte. So this is what the site looks like today. And that's essentially the big area here right next to Uptown Charlotte. And keep looking at the slide. This is what it's going to look like in just a couple of years. So really excited about the growth and the opportunities. So this, for those of you who missed it and blinked, there it is. So really excited again about what's coming. So 4 million square foot of a build out that we're going to be putting in place right there next to Uptown Charlotte. What I'm focusing in on here is phase 1 of the build out, and this is about 700,000 square foot of the education and the research buildings. And I'll dive into this in just a little bit and explain the concept of ORCAD. But just before doing that, I wanted to dive a little bit more into the Brooklyn neighborhood, right? The site history behind this. So it says here on the slide, before it was demolished for urban renewal projects in the 1960s, Brooklyn was a thriving community of 1,000 families. So this is about 7,000 people that lived in the Brooklyn area with about 200 businesses. But all of that was displaced as a result of some of the things that happened in the growth of Charlotte. Right in the middle here is a school, an educational establishment that was in the heart of Brooklyn. And what you see there is called the Jacob's Ladder. And just etch that in the back of your minds for a while, because we're going to be bringing that to the story of how we're birthing the Pearl in just a little bit, right? So there it is, the Myers Street Jacob's Ladder School. This is established in 1886. This is the county's first graded school for African Americans. And when you think about all of the activities that happened in that school and in that community and what got displaced, we thought, look, it's going to be really important for us to pay homage to the greatness of the history behind the site that is the Pearl. So we're envisioning creating what we call a purposeful walk. This is a chance to re-knit the city, as I've put in this slide here. And one of the things that really took me aback when I moved from Pittsburgh to Charlotte was how, as I described earlier, Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities in North America. You look at the city skyline and it's beautiful, it's amazing. Yet at the same time, a couple of years ago, a report came out that said that Charlotte is number 50 in the top 50 metropolitan cities for upward mobility. Meaning if you're born poor in the Charlotte area, chances are you will remain poor, right? And that in many ways, it struck me as being emblematic of what's wrong with healthcare in the United States, the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And I think it's time for us to heal that. I think it's time for us to address that head on. And at Atrium Health, with the leadership of Gene Woods, our CEO and president, we've been doing a number of things through our social impact strategies, through our partnerships, through a number of community efforts to really lead that charge. But I truly believe that the Pearl has an opportunity to really catalyze that movement in a way that we've not seen happen at a national level. So this is the Purposeful Walk. It's an outdoor museum, and we'll be connecting up various parts of the Pearl, but also paying tribute to the Brooklyn neighborhood, and then bringing in the new, right? Making sure that we're able to really focus in on the elements of some of how we might be able to spur the next economic resurgence of the area and of the Southeast and beyond. A couple more pictures of the Purposeful Walk and some of the planning work that we're doing. Here's the Jacob's Ladder, right? So I'll describe this in a little bit more detail. But on one side is the big educational building, and I'll show you a little bit more detail of that. And then on the other side is ORCAD North America and the research building, as we've been calling it right now. And that's the big connector space between the two, and then the big Jacob's Ladder being represented here. So what you had etched in the back of your minds, as I'd requested earlier, now you see it come to life. And imagine perhaps medical school graduation event. Imagine hackathons and pitch events. Imagine just having a casual conversation, not just with a research professor, but perhaps an entrepreneur and an investor along the sides of the Jacob's Ladder. So there are lots of things that you can imagine come to life in a livable space, in a workable space like what we're imagining here. An underpass connection to uptown Charlotte. So lots of amazing things coming. And here in this slide, I've essentially captured the core elements of this knowledge community and the value propositions around this, right? A very patient-centered, and I'd almost challenge this and say a person-centered approach to how we're building this space, creating this connected fabric that really promotes those intentional collisions that I was talking about earlier, creating the infrastructure for innovations to really flourish, and then embedding into it all of the core elements of economic development as well. So this is an interesting slide here. It talks about how, supported by about $1.5 billion in private investments, we're going to really drive creating lots and lots of accessible jobs. It's about, by one estimate, and this is a study that we commissioned last year, about 5,500 jobs on site at the Pearl. about 11,500 jobs across the county. So really interesting how this is going to spur then the next economic resurgence, I believe, across the Southeast. The community impact element of this is going to be really critical as well. And so we've been really focused in on not just bringing ORCAD, and I've teased it enough, so I'm going to unbox it in the next couple of minutes here, but the community impact of not just focusing in on surgical training and experiential learning and robotics, but also saying, hey, how do we look at more of an ecosystem, a pipeline of opportunities? So think about medical students, think about college programs of various sorts intersecting with the things that would be pushing forward from a medical education perspective, but also the feeder systems, the HBCUs, the schools, the high schools, the elementary schools, and others really feeding into the STEM programming components and all of that. And then the health equity components are really, really important as well. This was based out of one of the studies that we'd commissioned, the economic impact of just the academics alone in the Pearl District, right? So up to about $7.6 billion worth of annual economic impact, with upwards of 63,000 jobs supported by 2040. So really exciting. So that's the schematic overall of the Innovation District. Really exciting to see how those buildings will be coming up. Those cranes that we're so used to in Charlotte will be building the future of medical education and our communities in a very short time to come. But let me double click on the phase 1A of the build out. And that's the buildings that you'll start seeing coming up starting early next year. So right where this is located in that site that I'd shown you earlier, and I love the imagery around this, the symbolism of this. We had a data center, right? This was our big IT data center. And in the last couple of years, our amazing IT team, what they did was they actually moved everything to the cloud, right? So what we were able to do with the data center was we were able to, you're right, demolish it. So we demolished and flattened the data center, and on top of that will be the new medical school, as well as the innovation components that we're talking about earlier. So it's very poetic in how that's actually coming together, right? So what you see here on one side, the tall building, that's the Howard R. Levine Center for Education. It's about 350,000 square foot of space, really exciting. And in addition to the Wake Forest University School of Medicine, the second campus of the Wake Forest School of Medicine, we'll also have the Carolinas College of Health Sciences, the Wake Forest School of Professional Studies, and the Wake Forest School of Business. And we're in deep discussions about continuing to broaden that ecosystem with other educational establishments in the right mix coming together around this as well. And in the research building, it's about 315,000 square foot of space. That was in the initial stages of planning, about 200,000+ square foot of space. So it's really grown quite a bit. Will be ORCAD North America. And a bunch of wet lab space and corporate innovation space. So really excited about how that's coming in together. And then this connector space with learning studios and auditoriums and vivariums and the Jacob's Ladder that I showed you earlier as well. So very exciting, right? And this is the buildings coming to life through the power of architectural diagrams. So just wanted to give you an impression of what this is going to look like as it starts coming together. Timeline-wise, if you're curious, I talked about how we've flattened the data center, right? This week, we're coming up with the fencing around the phase 1 area of the build-out, and you'll see signage and all of that, talking about the Pearl and Atrium and Wake. And we're going to then start the building process in early 2023. It should be done essentially by 2025, and that's the ribbon cutting and the opening of the medical school, as well as ORCAD North America. So really, really excited about this. A couple more images that show you some concepts around what this is going to look like inside. So very exciting there as well. We're going to bring in all of the technological advancements I mentioned earlier in the Clarity slide, that AI and virtual and augmented reality, these are not just nice to have components, these are must have components of the future that we're envisioning together. But embedding that into the fabric of our innovation district is essentially the goal here. A quick word or two about ORCAD North America, and I'll end with this in a few minutes here. So ORCAD, so how many of you have heard of ORCAD? Show of hands. All right, it's about 55% of the audience have heard about ERCAD. So ERCAD essentially is the hub for surgical training and experiential learning, specifically around robotics, but also around various techniques that are perfected through a lot of industry collaborations as well. So you see some of the logos represented here on the slide. But like I mentioned earlier, ERCAD has a number of facilities globally, including in Asia and in Europe and South America and Africa. There's one in Rwanda, Africa. But there hasn't been an ERCAD in North America. And through amazing leadership that we've had here at Atrium, Dr. Brent Matthews, Dr. Dionysus Brohides, Dr. T. Mormon, and various other clinical leaders as well, we've really been able to gravitate towards this vision of landing ERCAD in the shores of North America, and that too here in Charlotte. So we now have an exclusive deal with ERCAD based out of Strasbourg in France to have ERCAD North America be headquartered in Charlotte. And this will be the only ERCAD across all of North America. And so that has a lot of different ramifications on the future of surgical training and experiential learning and robotics as being headquartered in the Charlotte area. So this is a little bit more about ERCAD and what it's going to really represent. So you see all of the components around innovation and applied research, experiential education and learning, really culminating around ERCAD North America. Simulation, lots of activities happening here in Winston-Salem around simulation. The Carolina Simulation Center in Charlotte. We're really going to be coming together around the future of simulation and care team training as well. So not just focused in on a specific subspecialty, whether it's around orthopedics or GI or neurosurgery or heart and vascular, but really around care team training as well, which, as you all can appreciate, is really important. Quality and data and data analytics and AI is going to be are going to be other components that will be the core focus of ERCAD North America. Lots of interest from groups like MITRE, based out of Washington, D.C., and Medias, a group that's really charged with a consortium of medical devices and managing quality elements around medical devices. We just had some really interesting conversations in the last several months. The FDA is really interested in the ecosystem that we're building here in Charlotte as well. So you can imagine the quality components and how a living lab, like what we're building, that's attached to a large health system that is growing like Atrium Health, and what that can do to expedite the translational elements of some of these devices, innovations, and capabilities. So really, really excited about all of that. This is perhaps one of my last slides, a little bit about the flipped curriculum that we're planning for the Wake Forest University School of Medicine. And I was just this morning talking with Dr. Angela Sharkey, and we're talking about how we're going to embed innovative design thinking capabilities directly into the curriculum of the medical school itself. So I remember when I went through med school 3 decades ago, the stuff that you're going through right now, right? Anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, surgical training. Look, all of these are really important, and we're obviously going to emphasize the best ways to continue to teach these disciplines in medical school. But taking a little bit more of an integrated approach, we believe that we can actually make room for critical thinking, for some of these clinical skills, the health equity components, what we call ideals, right? Inclusion, diversity, equity, advocacy, leadership, and social justice as fundamental elements of also what we build into the curriculum. And then innovation and entrepreneurship. How do we make sure that we're able to teach some of these disciplines and build it into the specifics of how it is that you start caring together as a care team or in your specific disciplines? So really excited about the emphasis that we're going to be bringing into play in the new medical school. So I'll end with this quote by Victor Hugo. And this is something that I think about all the time as I strategize, as I work with fellow clinicians and leaders like Dr. Mormon and Dr. Chu and others across Atrium. There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And the ideas that I've shared with you, where together as an ecosystem, as a community, if we're able to come together around those struggles that we've seen as a community, those challenges that exist in healthcare today, those promises that we know we can actually really catalyze forward through the most powerful of those partnerships that can culminate in something like what I've just described here with ORCAD North America, the Pearl, the medical school, and this thriving ecosystem that we're building. There is nothing more powerful than an idea. This time has come. So my call to action to all of you today is, as we build our tomorrows today, be excited about this, right? And then continue to innovate, continue to think about how do we connect the dots, right? Whether it's in your own educational establishments, as you continue to go out there in various other health systems, how do you continue to connect those dots? How do you make sure that you're able to come together and think about connecting those struggles and those opportunities that we have on the ground with broader opportunities as well as industry collaborations and partnerships, and leverage the strongest of academic and scientific rigor to really propel forward those innovations, those ideas, and those entrepreneurial activities. I think we can do it together. And I do think that medicine actually deserves this. The future of healthcare actually does look really bright if we look at it through the lens of innovation done right. So with that, I'll end here, and thank you very much.
Please stay up if you will.
Sure, absolutely.
So, thank you, Rasu. What a fantastic project this is. It's really exciting. We'll take some questions. Got about 15 minutes for Dr. Shrestha. And while folks are thinking about that, let me ask you a question.
Absolutely.
You know, as we grew up in orthopedic surgery during my time, there was a lot of, I'm not going to say friction, but there were a lot of guardrails and relationships with industry, and really, in many respects, thank you, frowned on to really have a very integrated relationship with industry. That's passé. You know, there are right and wrong ways to work with industry, and obviously ORCAD's going to be centered on that. You've recruited a lot of really important corporate partners. Can you talk briefly about how you see the interaction between industry and science going forward?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you, T. So I don't know if I told you this, but I'm a radiologist, right? So every year, the week after Thanksgiving, we never have Thanksgiving because it's always gone with RSNA, the Radiological Society of North America. We go to Chicago, McCormick Place, and you know, the week is spent in Chicago interacting with fellow radiologists, industry partners, and collaborators. A couple of years back, this might have been maybe 10 years or so ago, I was on the stage with Jeff Immelt, who's the CEO of GE at that point. And the remark that I made was that the future of healthcare is going to be built on the shoulders of the strongest of partnerships. And there was some similar debate, a similar discourse, T, around, all right, but you know, how do we make sure that we're actually able to do that? Because industry is motivated with perhaps a different set of things versus academia and versus health systems. And what I said is, look, I think it's going to be really important for us to, as we think about purchases that we make as a health system, right? Lots of modalities, MRI scanners, robots, and devices and drugs that we purchase from industry partners. We need to keep that separate from the strategic collaborations that we can actually be focused in on as well. So what we've devised is a really creative way to separate church and state, so to speak, but also at the same time, really then try to connect together our strategic priorities and the vendors' product roadmaps with the capabilities that we bring in as a learning health system, as a living lab. And when you do that partnership right, I think there's magic that's created at the other end, right? And that's what we're starting to see here in ORCAD North America. We have, you know, really tremendous partners like Siemens and Stryker and Medtronic and J&J and Pentax and Intuitive Surgical really coming around the table and wanting to be part of ORCAD North America and the Pearl. And what we'll be doing together is leveraging this living lab, not just showcasing the latest and greatest of the robotic devices and capabilities and techniques, but also interacting vehemently with our medical students, with our fellows, with our nurses, with our surgeons, CMC being just walking distance away, and leveraging this living lab of our combined health system to then really focus in on those data and quality elements, to then really focus in on not just training on the latest techniques, but also focusing in on the translational elements of those product roadmaps that we're talking about. So I think there is a way to do those partnerships in the right construct.
Thank you. Questions for Dr. Shrestha?
I'm like the center.
You just came down on a rocket slide out of the OR, didn't you, Jeff?
No, I was deposed this morning by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Oh my.
It's a lot of fun. The question is with clinical innovation, and I'm not talking about the kind of clinical innovation where we put a kung fu grip on the instrumentation we're already using. I'm talking about huge leaps forward. And how do we do huge leaps forward in clinical innovation in the era of value, where we're really talking about decreasing the cost, but when we're really pushing into new territories where a procedure that we're doing, an implant that we're using, is so far outside of what people understand for billing and the appropriateness of healthcare and decreasing costs and those sorts of things. How do we innovate in this current environment? What's your advice on how to do that as we continue to move forward?
So this journey, it's a great question. Thank you. I appreciate that, because it actually does speak to the economic realities of where healthcare is stuck in today, right? This $3.8 trillion industry that is healthcare is really stuck in the volume-based paradigm that, as I pointed out earlier in that clarity slide, doesn't work. Right? It's failed the test of the pandemic was the phrase that I used earlier. So as we think about transformational innovation, to your point, I believe that it really is focusing in on not just the elements of the transactions that these innovations have been focused in on in the last many decades. It's been about transactions, heads in beds. How many scans can you do in any given modality? How many procedures can you do at any given point in time? And some of the efficiency elements of that. And look, efficiency is not a bad thing. I think that's going to be really, really important as well. But the call of value really also propels us to think about not just heads in beds and how many scans and how many widgets and how many transactions, but the experience overall. And encapsulated in that experience are the quality elements that we need to continue to drive forward in this value-based era that we're going towards. So when you think about robotics, even when you think about modalities and scanners and procedures, it really is focusing on excelling in that path forward around experience and bringing costs down, but also at the same time improving quality. The other component to this too, and this is where, again, at a macro level, the economics of healthcare really comes into play, is the crazy dynamic between payers and providers. And I briefly alluded to that in kind of the disconnect, even in the economics on this side of the pandemic, or as we're living through the pandemic. But the payers and the providers are together motivated to make sure that the quality of care and the experience for what we on the provider side call our patients and what is referred to as members on the payer side, they are people, right? So at the end of the day, if we're really focusing on more person-centered care and focusing in on not just enhancing the experience, but also making sure that we're upping the quality, so we're able to keep those people as well as possible for as long as possible. At the end of the day, that's what actually brings costs overall down for healthcare, the industry overall. So I think focusing in on some of those broader economic, macroeconomic paradigms in the solutions that we're going to be innovating around is going to be really important as well.
Hi, thank you. That was truly a remarkable presentation of what you're doing. I love the backstory on how the Pearl is being created and envisioned. It's truly wonderful. Joe took some of my thunder away with his question, because mine was along the same lines. But I did want to ask, how are you looking at research, clinical research? it's not necessarily innovation all the time. And so how are you intend to treat that in this new placemaking center that you have? And to what emphasis will MSK be in there?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And T might want to answer a bit of that too. But just to kick things off.
I'm more interested in your answer.
So feel free to add to this as well. But that's a great question. One of the the design principles of what you saw on my slides there, the vision around, you saw the education building and the connector space with the Jacob's ladder, and you saw the research tower right next to it, was the intentionality behind having the medical school and all of the training that will happen there right next to the research building with ERCAD and the wet lab space and the research efforts that will be focused in on that building as well. And the walkability, the bikeability to CMC and other areas where, again, a lot of research is already happening. So there's a lot of intentionality around that. Just yesterday, I was talking with Dr. Julie Frashlog, who's our chief academic officer and currently the dean of the School of Medicine and also the CEO of Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist. And she's as excited as I am, if not more, about what it is that we're building here. And the reality here is that our goal is to continue to really spur more research and ensure that the bridge that oftentimes is missing or is difficult between the last mile of that research and industry, that gets bridged through the activities that we're continuing to push forward at the Pearl, right? So through this placemaking that we're pushing forward, how do we bring some of those translational research components and have those intentional collisions with the right industry partners, with innovators, with investors and others, and then creatively leverage the rest of this academic learning health system that is our combined health system as a living lab for us to continue to propagate more of that research. One of the other things, and I'll maybe hand it to T for any comments. Well, one of the other things that we're also focused in on is almost like a reverse pitch, right? And we talk a lot about bench to bedside research, and that's essentially how we do a lot of research today. Dr. Frashlog and I have talked about how do we reverse that? How do we have more of a struggles-based research approach, a problems-based research approach, where we're looking at the problems of consequences first, and then putting in our energy and a force field around those problems to then come up with the right solutions. So almost reversing it altogether. Dr. Frashlog calls it not the bench to bedside, but the bedside to bench type of research. And I think that's something that we're really excited about, as we think about the placemaking components and some of the dynamics that we're bringing into play as well.
Great. Thank you, Russ. So Lee, the translational piece is what I think is really the ERCAT focus will be. OREF is always going to have a role. So don't worry, we're going to count on you because we need that seed funding for these projects.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a very strong clinical research program already. Rachel Seymour, who's on the second row over here, has brought in over $200 million of public grant funding in Charlotte alone. And I know Andy's team has done much more in Winston-Salem, but that'll go on. But the ERCAT focus, I think, will be more the translation than the finish line, as you mentioned. Dr. Shrestha, we've loved having you. And we have a small token of our appreciation. Rachel, if you wouldn't mind bringing that up for us. We know you're incredibly busy, particularly with all that's going on in our merger world. And thank you so much for being with us. It's been great.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Appreciate it.
A few things. Dr. Anderson and I wanted you to have some MSKI swag.
Oh,
along
I love it.
Atrium swag. So
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you so
Seymour.
much for
Thank
being
you very
here.
much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for coming. You already know, the next time you come back, you can solve the conundrum of how we do value-based care for individuals versus for society.
Oh, there you go. All right. I'll work on that.